essays. These essays are very useful to your exams. So, all of you, which students taken optional English for your bachelor degree, please watch till end. These essays are very important.
The Londoner. To the editor of The Reflector. Mr. Reflector, I was born under the shadow of St. Dunstan's steeple, just where the conflux of the eastern and western inhabitants of this twofold city meet and jostle in friendly opposition at Temple Bar. The same day which gave me to the world, saw London happy in the celebration of her great annual feast. This I cannot help looking upon as a lively omen of the future great goodwill which I was destined to bear toward the city, resembling in kind that solicitude which every chief magistrate is supposed to feel for whatever concerns her interests and well-being. Indeed, I consider myself in some sort a speculative Lord Mayor of London, for those circumstances unhappily preclude me from the hope of ever arriving at the dignity of a gold chain and spittle sermon, yet thus much will I say of myself in truth, that Whittington with his cat, just emblem of vigilance and a furred gown, never went beyond me in affection which I bear to the citizens. I was born, as you have heard, in a crowd. This has begotten me an entire affection for that way of life, amounting to an almost insurmountable aversion from solitude and rural scenes. This aversion was never interrupted or suspended, except for a few years in the younger part of my life, during a period in which I had set my affections upon a charming young woman. Every man, while the passion is upon him, is for a time at least addicted to groves, and meadows, and purling streams. During this short period of my existence, I contracted just familiarity enough with rural objects to understand tolerably well ever after the poets, when they declaim in such passionate terms in favor of a country life. For my own part, now the fit is past, I have no hesitation in declaring that a mob of happy faces crowding up at the pit door of Drury Lane Theatre, just at the hour of 6, gives me 10,000 sincerer pleasures than I could ever receive from all the flocks of silly sheep that ever whitened the plains of Arcadia or Epsom Downs. This passion for crowds is nowhere feasted so full as in London. The man must have a rare recipe for melancholy who can be dull in Fleet Street. I am naturally inclined to hypochondria, but in London it vanishes, like all other ills. Often, when I have felt a weariness or distaste at home, have I rushed out into her crowded Strand, and fed my humor, till tears have wetted my cheek for unutterable sympathies with the multitudinous moving picture, which she never fails to present at all hours, like the scenes of a shifting pantomime.
The very deformities of London
which give distaste to others, from habit do not displease me. The endless succession of shops where fancy miscalled folly is supplied with perpetual gauds and toys excite in me no puritanical aversion. I gladly behold every appetite supplied with its proper food. The obliging customer, and the obliged tradesman, things which live by bowing and things which exist but for homage, do not affect me with disgust. From habit I perceive nothing but urbanity, where other men, more refined, discover meanness. I love the very smoke of London, because it has been the medium most familiar to my vision. I see grand principles of honor at work in the dirty ring which encompasses two combatants with fists, and principles of no less eternal justice in the detection of a pickpocket. The salutary astonishment with which an execution is surveyed convinces me more forcibly than 100 volumes of abstract polity that the universal instinct of man in all ages has leaned to order and good government. Thus an art of extracting morality from the commonest incidents of a town life is attained by the same well-natured alchemy with which the foresters of Arden, in a beautiful country, found tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Where has spleen her food but in London? Humor, interest, curiosity, suck at her measureless breasts, without a possibility of being satiated. Nursed amid her noise, her crowds, her beloved smoke, what have I been doing all my life, if I have not lent out my heart with usury to such scenes? I am, sir, your faithful servant, a Londoner. Summary. The present essay is the letter written to the editor of the newspaper, The Reflector. Here the author is highly connected with the City of London. He explains how the city has played an integral part in his life. He has loved everything that belongs to the city. The day he was born happened to be the celebration day of annual Feast of London. With a great admiration he remembers how the city is the conflux of the eastern and western inhabitants of this twofold city meet. In his opinion, the city has the powerful good omen for future. The magistrate of the city is destined to bear a future goodwill. Even the writer considers himself as a speculative Lord Mayor of London. This shows how proud the author is about his place. The dignity of gold chain and the importance of Spittle's sermon in the church is maintained by everyone. He tells that he loves all the citizens of London as much as Sir Whittington loved his cat. The statue still stands as an emblem of vigilance. As the writer was born in a crowed city, even today he loves crowed places and has much aversion for rural life and solitude. At the same time he admits that for some time he loved streams, trees and hills as he was passionate about a young girl when he was a boy. Like a poet he too felt the urge to write poems, but London with so many people has its own charm. He had to tolerate few rural objects of country life for some time as his heart was full of feelings. He says, "Mob of happy faces crowding up at the pit just at the hour of 6, gives me 10,000 sincerer pleasures than I could ever receive from all the flocks of silly sheep that ever whitened the plains of Arcadia or Epsom Downs. Every man must be happy on Fleet Street. Only few melancholic men cannot be happy in London. The writer suffers from hypochondria, but as soon as he rushes to the streets of London, his fear automatically vanishes. Even whenever he has some problem at home, he comes out on the streets of the city, and the humor of the city makes him laugh to a higher extent till his cheeks are wet, but gets relief soon. Like pantomime, the scenes of London shifts again and again, which gives calmness and peace to the writer. The writer doesn't accept the deformities of the cities as others. He loves his city, her crowds, the endless succession of shops where fancy miscalled folly is supplied with gauds and toys, excite the writer with no puritanical aversion. He loves everything that is sold in shops. He is always excited as a customer. He even loves every kind of food that is supplied. He doesn't have any kind of aversion as a customer in the marketplace. He enjoys the smoke of the city. He has learned that the universal instinct of man in all ages has leaned to order and good government. He could see some principles at working place. Thus an art of extracting morality from the commonest incidents of a town life is attained by the same well-natured alchemy with which the foresters of Arden, in a beautiful country, he finds humor, interest, and curiosity, everything he finds in London City. The writer concludes saying that, nursed amid her noise, her crowds, her beloved smoke, what have I been doing all my life, if I have not lent out my heart with usury to such scenes? The Character of Willie Wimble by Joseph Addison. As I was yesterday morning walking with Sir Roger before his house, a country fellow brought him a huge fish, which he told him, Mr. William Wimble had caught that very morning, and that he presented it, with his service to him, and intended to come and dine with him. At the same time he delivered a letter, which my friend read to me as soon as the messenger left him. Sir Roger, I desire you to accept of a jack, which is the best I have caught this season. I intend to come and stay with you a week, and see how the perch bite in the Black River. I observed with some concern, the last time I saw you upon the bowling green, that your whip wanted a lash to it. I will bring half a dozen with me that I twisted last week, which I hope will serve you all the time you are in the country. I have not been out of the saddle for 6 days last past, having been at Eton with Sir John's eldest son. He takes to his learning hugely. I am, sir, your humble servant, Wimble. This extraordinary letter, and message that accompanied it, made me very curious to know the character and quality of the gentleman who sent them, which I found to be as follows. Wimble is younger brother to a baronet, and descended of the ancient family of the Wimbles. He is now between 40 and 50, but being bred to no business and born to no estate, He generally lives with his elder brother as superintendent of his game. He hunts a pack of dogs better than any man in the country, and is very famous for finding out a hare. He is extremely well versed in all the little handicrafts of an idle man. He makes a mayfly to a miracle, and furnishes the whole country with angle rods. As he is a good-natured officious fellow, and very much esteemed upon account of his family, he is a welcome guest at every house, and keeps up a good correspondence among all the gentlemen about him. He carries a tulip root in his pocket from one to another, or exchanges a puppy between a couple of friends that live perhaps in the opposite sides of the county. Will is a particular favorite of all the young heirs, whom he frequently obliges with a net that he has weaved, or a setting dog that he has made himself. He now and then presents a pair of garters of his own knitting to their mothers or sisters, and raises a great deal of mirth among them, by inquiring as often as he meets them how they wear. These gentlemanlike manufactures and obliging little humors make Will the darling of the country. 2. Sir Roger was proceeding in the character of him, when we saw him make up to us with 2 or 3 hazel twigs in his hand that he had cut in Sir Roger's woods, as he came through them, in his way to the house. I was very much pleased to observe on one side the hearty and sincere welcome with which Sir Roger received him, and on the other, the secret joy which his guest discovered at sight of the good old knight. After the first salutes were over, Will desired Sir Roger to lend him one of his servants to carry a set of shuttlecocks he had with him in a little box to a lady that lived about a mile off, to whom it seems he had promised such a present for above this half year. Sir Roger's back was no sooner turned, but honest Will began to tell me of a large cock pheasant that he had sprung in one of the neighboring woods, with 2 or 3 other adventures of the same nature. Odd and uncommon characters are the game that I look for, and most delight in, for which reason I was as much pleased with the novelty of the person that talked to me, as he could be for his life with the springing of a pheasant, and therefore listened to him with more than ordinary attention.
3. In the midst of his discourse the bell rung to dinner, where the gentleman I have been speaking of had the pleasure of seeing the huge jack he had caught, served up for the first dish in a most sumptuous manner. Upon our sitting down to it, he gave us a long account how he had hooked it, played with it, foiled it, and at length drew it out upon the bank, with several other particulars that lasted all the first course. A dish of wildfowl that came afterwards furnished conversation for the rest of the dinner, which concluded with a late invention of Will as for improving the quail pipe. 4. Upon withdrawing into my room after dinner, I was secretly touched with compassion towards the honest gentleman that had dined with us, and could not but consider with a great deal of concern how so good an heart and such busy hands were wholly employed in trifles, that so much humanity should be so little benefit to others, and so much industry so little advantageous to himself. The same temper of mind and application to affairs might have recommended him to the public esteem, and have raised his fortune in another station of life. What good to his country or himself might not a trader or merchant have done with such useful, though ordinary qualifications? 5. Will. Wimble's is the case of many a younger brother of a great family, who had rather see their children starve like gentlemen than thrive in a trade or profession that is beneath their quality. This humor fills several parts of Europe with pride and beggary. It is the happiness of a trading nation, like ours, that the younger sons, though incapable of any liberal art or profession, may be placed in such a way of life as may perhaps enable them to vie with the best of their family. Accordingly, we find several citizens that were launched in the world with narrow fortunes, rising by an honest industry to greater estates than those of their elder brothers. It is not improbable, Will was formerly tried at divinity, law, or physique, and that finding his genius did not lie that way, his parents gave him up at length to his own inventions. But certainly, however improper he might have been for studies of a higher nature, he was perfectly well turned for the occupations of trade and commerce. As I think this is a point which cannot be too much inculcated, I shall desire my reader to compare what I have here written with what I have said in my 21st speculation.
6. Introduction. Joseph Addison was a famous English essayist, dramatist, journalist, and politician, best known as principal author, Richard Steele, of the periodicals The Tatler and The Spectator. Addison's essay, The Character of Wimble, is about a person called Wimble. It traces his character. Steele ends the prose by universalizing the problem of difference between two brothers, the younger and the elder. Will's letter. Addison visits his friend Sir Roger de Coverley at his house. He receives a man with a huge fish and a letter. The messenger says that Wimble a fish. He also informs that Wimble would dine with Roger. Sir Roger reads the letter given by the messenger. Wimble has written it. It says that Will is willing to stay with him for a week. Will promises to bring lash for his whip. He also informs that he had been busy helping Sir John's family. Character of Will. Will is a younger brother of a baronet. He is about 40 and 50. He had no specific business to do. He helps people with his handicraft skills. He makes angle rods. He always carries tulips, which he gifts to the family members. He sometimes gifts puppies. Many people love him. He presents handmade cloths to women. He comes to Sir Roger's house. On his way, he cuts a few hazel twigs. He is given a hearty welcome. He loves Sir Roger. He requests Roger to give a servant who would carry shuttlecocks to a lady nearby. He then talks about adventurous stories, which attract Steele.
Conclusion. They eat the fish, during which time Will talks about the way he caught the fish. After dinner, Addison feels pity for Will. He considers Will as a responsible man, but he is without a job on his own. It has been a practice in Europe that the elder brothers take care of the business, and the younger ones are left for the family. Addison does not like this. If Will had been into the field of commerce, he would have shined. On Finding Things by E.V. Lucas. In the essay, On Finding Things by E.V. Lucas, we have the theme of happiness, good fortune, enthusiasm and deception. Taken from his Adventures and Enthusiasm collection, the reader realizes after reading the essay that Lucas may be exploring the theme of happiness. Lucas finds great joy in finding things, particularly things that cannot be traced back to their owner. Things like money, for example. Lucas feels no guilt about finding small amounts of money and keeping it for himself, as he knows that what has been found is not identifiable to others. There will be no repercussions, and Lucas is free to spend the money as he need not fear either from the owner of the money or the police. Though some critics might suggest that what is small, in value, to Lucas may not necessarily be small to the owner, and as such Lucas does not have a conscience. However, it might be worth nothing that when Lucas finds anything of value, like the gold brooch, he immediately goes to the police station and hands it in, knowing that someone will be worried and hoping to find the brooch again.
With the happiness that Lucas feels with finding things, not only joy but of good fortune too. Lucas feels elated that he has found things on his travels and considers himself lucky to have done so. If anything, finding something makes Lucas feel as though he has been lucky and can walk with a spring in his step. Unfortunately for Lucas, he has not found many things, and some values each new thing that he finds, no matter how irrelevant it might seem to be to others. Though it is noticeable that Lucas' favorite is to find money, the reason is twofold. First, money cannot be traced, and secondly, it is of value to everyone. Lucas can buy things with the money he finds. It is also possible that Lucas feels his own self-importance has risen when he finds things, something that would excite any man or woman. If anything, finding things boosts Lucas' ego and opens the door to happiness. A happiness is founded on other people's misfortune. What is also interesting about the essay is the fact that Lucas, though not driven solely with finding things, is still at times preoccupied with finding things. The goal is always to pursue joy when finding new things, though at the same time to be conscious that what is found may be important to those who have lost the item, and as such Lucas endeavors to do the right thing. That being is mentioned to bring the item to the police. The end of the essay is also interesting, as Lucas knows that there are people in the world who will try and deceive him when it comes to finding things. The woman with the bent sovereign is being an example. It is as though the woman finds joy in fooling people and seeing their reaction when they notice that they are being made a mockery of in public. Something would not be pleasing to anybody. It is also interesting that Lucas wishes that he sees such occurrences, of people being mocked or made a fool of. Yet he himself would not like to be the victim of such a hoax, knowing only too well that being ridiculed in public is sure to lessen a man's self-esteem. Again, nobody would like to be made a fool of in public, no matter how ingenious the trick may be. The only avenue of escape for the victim is to laugh along with the hoax, and to take it as though it did not really matter, nor was it an embarrassment. However, the reader is sure that the victim, as they walk away after the hoax has been exposed with his head lowered, knowing that he has been made to feel like a fool by his friends, may leave some victims disconnected from the world if they take the hoax to heart. It is better to hold one's hands in the air and admit defeat and accept what has happened. It is probably for this reason that the victim laughs at what has happened to him. Men in Black. Best known for his comic play She Stoops to Conquer and the novel The Vicar of Wakefield, Oliver Goldsmith was also one of the most prominent artists of the 18th century. The character of the Man in Black, originally published in the Public Ledger, appears in Goldsmith's most popular essay collection, The Citizen of the World. Who is the Man in Black? Though Goldsmith said that the Man in Black was modeled on his father, more than one critic has observed that the character bears a striking resemblance to the author himself. The Man in Black Essay. 2. In one of our late excursions into the country, happening to discourse upon the provision that was made for the poor in England, he seemed to the Man in Black Essay. Though fond of many acquaintances, I desire an intimacy only with a few. The Man in Black, whom I have often mentioned, is one whose friendship I could wish to acquire, because he possesses my esteem. His manners, it is true, are tinctured with some strange inconsistencies, and he may be justly termed a humorist in a nation of humorists. Though he is generous even to profusion, he affects to be thought a prodigy of parsimony and prudence, though his conversation be replete with the most sordid and selfish maxims.
His heart is dilated with the most unbounded love. I have known him profess himself a man-hater, while his cheek was glowing with compassion, and, while his looks were softened into pity, I have heard him use the language of the most unbounded ill-nature. Some affect humanity and tenderness, others boast of having such dispositions from nature, but he is the only man I ever knew who seemed ashamed of his natural benevolence. He takes as much pains to hide his feelings, as any hypocrite would to conceal his indifference, but on every unguarded moment the mask drops off, and reveals him to the most superficial observer. In one of our late excursions into the country, happening to discourse upon the provision that was made for the poor in England, he seemed amazed how any of his countrymen could be so foolishly weak as to relieve occasional objects of charity, when the laws had made such ample provision for their support. In every parish house, says he, the poor are supplied with food, clothes, fire, and a bed to lie on. They want no more. I desire no more myself, yet still they seem discontented. I am surprised at the inactivity of our magistrates in not taking up such vagrants, who are only a weight upon the industrious. I am surprised that the people are found to relieve them, when they must be at the same time sensible that it in some measure encourages idleness, extravagance, and imposture. Were I to advise any man for whom I had the least regard, I would caution him by all means not to be imposed upon by their false pretenses. Let me assure you, sir, they are impostors, every one of them, and rather merit a prison than relief. He was proceeding in this strain earnestly, to dissuade me from an imprudence of which I am seldom guilty, when an old man, who still had about him the remnants of tattered finery, implored our compassion. He assured us that he was no common beggar, but forced into the shameful profession to support a dying wife and 5 hungry children. Being prepossessed against such falsehoods, his story had not the least influence upon me, but it was quite otherwise with the man in black. I could see it visibly operate upon his countenance, and effectually interrupt his harangue. I could easily perceive that his heart burned to relieve the 5 starving children, but he seemed ashamed to discover his weakness to me. While he thus hesitated between compassion and pride, I pretended to look another way, and he seized this opportunity of giving the poor petitioner a piece of silver, bidding him at the same time, in order that I should hear, go work for his bread, and not tease passengers with such impertinent falsehoods for the future. For as he had fancied himself quite unperceived, he continued, as we proceeded, to rail against beggars with as much animosity as before. He threw in some episodes on his own amazing prudence and economy. With his profound skill in discovering impostors, he explained the manner in which he would deal with beggars. Were he a magistrate, hinted at enlarging some of the prisons for their reception, and told 2 stories of ladies that were robbed by beggarmen. He was beginning a third to the same purpose, when a sailor with a wooden leg once more crossed our walks, desiring our pity, and blessing our limbs. I was for going on without taking any notice, but my friend, looking wistfully upon the poor petitioner, bid me stop, and he would show me with how much ease he could at any time detect an impostor. He now, therefore, assumed a look of importance, and in an angry tone began to examine the sailor, demanding in what engagement he was thus disabled and rendered unfit for service. The sailor replied in a tone as angrily as he, that he had been an officer on board a private ship of war, and that he had lost his leg abroad, in defense of those who did nothing at home. At this reply, all my friend's importance vanished in a moment. He had not a single question more to ask. He now only studied what method he should take to relieve him unobserved. He had, however, no easy part to act, as he was obliged to preserve the appearance of ill nature before me, and yet relieve himself by relieving the sailor. Casting, therefore, a furious look upon some bundles of chips which the fellow carried in a string at his back, my friend demanded how he sold his matches, but, not waiting for a reply, desired in a surly tone to have a shilling's worth. The sailor seemed at first surprised at his demand, but soon recollected himself, and presenting his whole bundle, "Here, master," says he, "take all my cargo, and a blessing into the bargain." It is impossible to describe with what an air of triumph my friend marched off with his new purchase. he assured me that he was firmly of opinion that those fellows must have stolen their goods who could thus afford to sell them for half value. He informed me of several different uses to which those chips might be applied. He expatiated largely upon the savings that would result from lighting candles with a match, instead of thrusting them into the fire. He averred that he would as soon have parted with a tooth as his money to those vagabonds, unless for some valuable consideration. I cannot tell how long this panegyric upon frugality and matches might have continued, had not his attention been called off by another object more distressful than either of the former. A woman in rags, with one child in her arms and another on her back, was attempting to sing ballads, but with such a mournful voice that it was difficult to determine whether she was singing or crying. A wretch, who in the deepest distress still aimed at good humor, was an object my friend was by no means capable of withstanding. His vivacity and his discourse were instantly interrupted. Upon this occasion his very dissimulation had forsaken him.
Even in my presence, he immediately applied his hands to his pockets, in order to relieve her, but guess his confusion, when he found he had already given away all the money he carried about him to former objects. The misery painted in the woman's visage, not half so strongly expressed as the agony in his. He continued to search for some time, but to no purpose, till, at length, of ineffable good nature, as he had no money, he put into her hands his shilling's worth of matches. Summary. In this essay, the author talks of a man who is not happy about his charitable actions. The man is an obvious philanthropist, but he is ashamed of it. Goldsmith lays out the ways, and gives many examples. He says, he is the only man I ever knew who seemed ashamed of his natural benevolence. First paragraph. The man is a charitable man. He cares about others, gives to others, and shares with others, but he pretends to not care about the well-being of others. He is ashamed of his natural benevolence. While he pretends to have a disliking for mankind, he's also not very good at pretending to be. The author reveals that his poker face has no feelings about the goodness what he does for mankind. While his looks were softened into pity, I have heard him use the language of the most unbounded ill nature. Second paragraph. The man in black is so concerned about the poor that he complains to the author how ignorant the rich are to the state of living of the poorer people. He says that the poor only want a few things, food, housing, clothes, and warmth, but cannot obtain those things due to the negligence of the rich. Third paragraph. The man in black gives a beggar a piece of silver, but when doing so, he appeared ashamed to present his good quality to the author. The man has too much pride to show his soft spot for the less fortunate. Fourth paragraph. When a man with a wooden leg passed the author and the man in black, the author ignored him. The man in black showed much attention to him, but instead of giving him money, he called him out to be a poser of the needy. But after hearing the sailor's story of fighting in defense of the country while others did nothing at home, the man gave money to him. He loved and cared listening to the poor. Fifth paragraph. The man in black and the author ran into a woman who was an obvious example of helpless, but he had no money to give her. He became shameful, as it was present in his face, but once he found a shilling's worth of matches in his pocket, and placed it in her hands. He was pleased with himself, seeing the smile in the woman's face. This anonymous man, the man in black, is a man of benevolence, and is bluntly shameful of it. There is no understanding of why. The man is one who cannot exhibit generous behavior, without being ashamed of it.
He wants the world to see him as a man who does not care too much about the well-being of others. He is the man in black, because he hides his benevolence. He does not want to be noticed for it.
So guys, these three essays are very important to your optional English, not only optional English. Basic English also have these three essays. In the 8th semester, one semester definitely you want to see this essay. Any improvement to our essay in a live session, please comment in comment section. Thank you.